I kept telling myself I shouldn't have come tonight. The whole ride to the party felt like I was running away from something, but deep down I knew I was running away from myself. My relationship had been suffocating me for months, quiet arguments, silent meals, messages left unseen, and a kind of emotional distance that felt colder than winter. My friend insisted that I needed a break, even just one night to breathe, so I agreed. I thought I would spend the evening pretending to smile, sipping a drink, and going home early. I didn't expect anything more. The moment I stepped inside the venue, everything hit me at once: warm lights, loud music, laughter spreading like wildfire. People of all cultures danced, talked, and moved with a freedom I had forgotten existed. For a second, I stood frozen near the entrance, feeling like an outsider watching life happen from behind glass. I reminded myself that no one here knew me, no one cared what I was going through, and maybe that was a strange kind of comfort. I drifted around the room, pretending to be occupied with my phone, pretending I wasn't lonely, pretending I wasn't thinking about the cold apartment and the man waiting there who barely looked at me anymore. I wanted to forget him just for one night. Not to betray him, just to remember who I used to be before everything became routine, dull, predictable. That's when I noticed them. 3 tall African men stood near the center of the room, talking among themselves. Something about them felt magnetic, not just their height or the way they carried themselves, but the calm confidence in their posture. They weren't loud like some of the others, weren't trying to impress anyone, yet people naturally glanced at them. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept drifting back. It was like my attention had been caught without my permission. I told myself it was harmless. Just curiosity. Just appreciation from a distance. But then one of them looked back at me. Not a quick glance. Not the kind of look men throw at women in crowded places. This was different. Slow, steady, observing, like he was trying to read something in my face. I instantly looked away, embarrassed by how fast my heart reacted. I didn't want to be seen. Not really. But a small part of me, one that had been starved of attention for too long, felt like someone had quietly whispered, "I notice you." I tried to slip away toward the quieter corner of the hall, but when I turned back, I saw the 3 of them now subtly facing my direction. They weren't approaching. They weren't crowding. They were just aware of me. It felt strange, unsettling, yet oddly comforting, like standing too close to a fire after shivering for hours. My friend had gone off dancing, so I was alone. That made everything feel even more intense. They could have ignored me, and I could have hidden behind the usual excuses. But somehow the distance between us kept shrinking without any of us moving. After a few minutes, one of them began walking toward me. My breath caught in my chest, and I forced myself to stay still. When he reached me, he didn't lean in or flirt. He simply asked, with a warm, polite smile, "Are you okay? You look lost." The softness in his voice shook me more than I expected. No one had asked me that in a long time, not sincerely, not with actual concern. I nodded quickly, trying to laugh it off, telling him I was fine. He didn't push, didn't tease, just held my gaze with a kind of patience that felt impossible to resist. A moment later, the other 2 joined him. They stood in a loose half circle, giving me space, not trapping me. The air felt heavier, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made my thoughts louder. All 3 introduced themselves, the names warm and unfamiliar on my tongue. When they spoke, their voices blended like different notes of the same melody, deep, calm, soothing. I felt strangely safe, even though I barely knew them. We talked casually at first, where I was from, how I ended up at the party, what I did for work. But with every answer I gave, I felt like they were listening with real interest, something I wasn't used to anymore. They noticed the cracks in my smile, the hesitation in my words. One of them said softly, "You seem tired from life." It stunned me because he was right, and no one else had noticed. The music grew louder, and people began crowding the center of the room. I found myself leaning closer to hear them better, not realizing how much I wanted the conversation to continue. Then one of them gently asked if I wanted to move somewhere quieter so we could talk without shouting. He didn't touch me. He didn't insist. He simply waited for my answer. I knew I should walk away. I knew this attention was dangerous. But something inside me, something lonely, ignored, aching, whispered that maybe being understood for once wasn't a crime. I took a quiet breath. And I nodded. As soon as I agreed, one of them stepped aside politely, gesturing toward a quieter hallway. It wasn't hidden or suspicious, just calmer, away from the noise and flashing lights. I walked ahead of them, aware of their presence behind me, not close enough to intimidate me but close enough that I could feel the warmth of being accompanied. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. We entered a smaller lounge area where the music felt like a distant heartbeat instead of a storm. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling, the kind that didn't demand attention but created a warm glow around everything. They let me choose where to sit, and I picked a couch in the corner. They sat across from me, leaving space, showing me that I wasn't trapped in anything I didn't want. For a moment, none of us spoke. They just looked at me with a quiet curiosity, waiting for me to start. I felt strangely exposed, not because they were staring, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to be listened to without judgment. One of them finally asked my name again, repeating it slowly as if memorizing it. Hearing him say it with that deep, warm tone made it sound more important than I was used to. So, one of them asked gently, "What brought you out tonight? You don't seem like someone who enjoys this type of chaos." His observation made me smile sadly. I told him the truth, not everything, but enough. I said life had felt heavy lately. I said I'd been trying to keep myself together. I said I came because I needed air, even if it was hidden behind loud music and strangers. None of them interrupted. None of them rushed to give advice. They simply listened with a seriousness that softened me in ways I didn't expect. One of them leaned forward slightly. "Someone at home not giving you what you deserve?" The question hit deeper than it should have. My breath trembled, and I quickly looked away. I wasn't sure why I felt safe enough to be honest, but I was tired of holding everything inside. "It feels like I'm fading in my own house," I whispered. "Like I'm living next to someone, not with them. And the worst part is, I don't even think he saw me leave tonight." The three men exchanged a brief look, not judgmental, not triumphant, just understanding. One of them spoke quietly. "Sometimes people forget the value of what they have, until someone else notices it." I felt a strange warmth bloom in my chest. Not flattery, not seduction, just truth delivered gently. We talked for a long time, longer than I realized. They asked about things no one had asked me in years, what I dreamed of doing, what I feared, what I missed about my old self. And with each answer, I felt layers peeling away. I wasn't performing, pretending, or hiding. I was simply me. At one point, I laughed at something one of them said, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. I didn't remember the last time I had laughed that freely. The sound surprised me, and they smiled softly, as if the laugh itself was a small victory. "You have a beautiful laugh," one of them said, in a tone that wasn't flirtatious but appreciative, as though he genuinely meant it. My cheeks warmed, not from shyness, but from the realization that someone had noticed something positive about me for the first time in a long while. Time felt different in that room, slower, kinder. I found myself watching their expressions, the sincerity in their eyes, how each of them carried a different kind of presence. One was calm and introspective, another warm and playful, the third quiet but deeply observant. Together, they made me feel something I couldn't quite describe, a mix of safety, attention, and emotional gravity pulling me closer. As I spoke, one of them gently reached out, not to touch me, but to place his hand on the couch beside mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from it. He didn't cross the space between us. He just left the choice to me. The simple gesture made my heart race. Not because it was physical, but because it was symbolic. A quiet offering of closeness, nothing more. I looked at their hands, mine slightly shaking, not because I was afraid but because I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in months. "You don't have to talk if it hurts," one of them said softly. "But you don't have to keep it inside either." I didn't know how to explain the emotion building in my chest. It wasn't attraction alone. It was relief, relief that someone noticed the exhaustion written between my words. Before I could respond, one of them asked in an even softer voice, "Can we tell you something?" "Only if you want to hear it." I nodded slowly, feeling the room tighten around us, not in danger but in intensity. They leaned in slightly, their voices lowering. "You deserve to feel alive again." The words hit me like a quiet earthquake. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just talking to strangers. I was standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. The room felt smaller after they said those words, as if the air itself had shifted around us. I wanted to deny it, to shake my head and insist that I was fine, that I didn't need saving or awakening or anything dramatic. But the truth sat heavy on my chest. I wasn't alive, not really. I was surviving, existing, moving through days like a ghost in my own life. Hearing someone acknowledge it so gently made something inside me tremble. I lowered my gaze, staring at my hands as if they held answers I'd forgotten. I should have stood up and left. I should have ended the conversation before it went too deep, before my heart began responding to things my mind still pretended to ignore. But I didn't move. None of us did. It was as if a fragile thread held us together, made from the unspoken truth that I didn't want to go back to feeling invisible. One of them shifted closer, not touching, just closing the emotional distance between us. "You're carrying too much alone," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to." His voice was steady, grounding. It made my throat tighten. I swallowed hard, whispering, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." The man sitting near the arm of the couch leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You're doing what anyone would do," he said. "Trying to find pieces of yourself again." I felt the sting of tears, but I blinked them away. I didn't want to cry. Crying felt like admitting something irreversible. Still, the warmth in their eyes made it difficult to keep the walls up. They weren't looking at me with pity. They were looking at me as if every small detail, the way I breathed, the way I avoided eye contact, the hesitation in my voice, meant something worth understanding. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was thick with something unspoken and fragile. One of them reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. His hand brushed the back of mine, not a grab or a demand, just a soft connection. It was the lightest touch, yet it sent a quiet shiver through me, not because of desire but because it was the first gentle touch I had felt in longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't move my hand away. He exhaled softly, and his thumb settled near my skin, not stroking, just resting there. The others watched me closely, not possessively but protectively, as if waiting for any sign of discomfort. There wasn't any. If anything, the tension inside me began to unravel, thread by thread. "You're trembling," one of them murmured. "I don't know what this is," I whispered. "It's okay not to know," he answered. "Just feel what you feel. You're not doing anything wrong by wanting to feel alive." The words weren't seductive, they were comforting. They melted something inside me, something I thought had hardened permanently. My shoulders dipped, relaxing for the first time in months. The man holding my hand shifted his palm upward, and I found myself letting my fingers settle into his. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. It was instinctive, natural, like my heart had made the decision without consulting me. The other two moved slightly closer, still keeping space but drawing into the same emotional circle. Their presence felt like warmth surrounding me, not trapping me. I was hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat echoing too loudly in my ears. One of them whispered, "You don't have to choose anything tonight. Just let yourself be seen." Those words, those simple, gentle words, they broke something important, maybe the fear, maybe the guilt, maybe the loneliness I'd been dragging like a weight. I didn't speak. Instead, I lifted my eyes to meet theirs. The three of them watched me with a depth that made it hard to breathe, concern, desire, compassion, respect all woven together. I felt small under the gaze, but not in a belittling way. More like someone who had been wandering in darkness and had suddenly stepped into a circle of light. Another hand reached out, brushing my shoulder with the back of his fingers. The touch was tentative, almost shy, as if he was afraid to push. My breath caught, but I didn't flinch. The warmth of that simple contact sent a ripple through me. In that quiet moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't thinking about right or wrong anymore. I wasn't thinking about who I should be or what anyone expected of me. I was thinking about the way their presence soothed the ache in my chest, how the smallest gestures made me feel wanted, chosen, valued. I moved slightly closer, just a few inches, barely anything at all. But those few inches felt like crossing an invisible line I had drawn for myself hours ago. One of them whispered, almost reverently, "You're safe here. Whatever you choose, we're with you." I closed my eyes, breathing in the warmth surrounding me. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, or what choices I would regret or defend. All I knew was that tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt something break open inside me, not destruction, but awakening. And as I opened my eyes again, I realized I was no longer fighting the pull. When I finally left the quiet room, the music and laughter of the party hit me like a wave. It felt distant and unreal, as if I were walking back into a world I didn't fully belong to anymore. My mind was spinning, not with fear, but with clarity I hadn't expected. The three of them stayed behind, their eyes following me for a moment before they let me go, giving me space while silently acknowledging that something significant had happened between us. I didn't know how to describe it. All I knew was that I had crossed a line, not with their hands or words alone, but with my heart. I walked through the crowded space, the chatter around me fading. Every laugh and shout seemed hollow compared to the quiet intensity I had just left. I realized I hadn't felt truly alive in months, not even weeks. And suddenly, the realization hit me, I had allowed my life to shrink into the corners of my apartment, the empty stares of someone who no longer saw me. Tonight, someone had. 3 people had. On my way home, I replayed every word, every glance, every gesture. I didn't feel shame in the way I had expected. I felt awakened. A part of me had been locked away, afraid of feeling too much, afraid of being too seen. But their presence had unlocked it. The intensity wasn't in anything physical, it was emotional, deep, raw. It left me trembling not from guilt alone but from the realization that life could still feel vivid, even if I hadn't allowed myself to experience it in a long time. The next morning, I couldn't ignore it. My phone buzzed with messages from my partner, mundane words that now felt empty. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of truth settle heavily on me. I couldn't go back to pretending nothing had changed. I couldn't undo the awakening, the small crack that had appeared in the armor I had been hiding behind. I owed myself honesty, if not to him, then at least to me. I decided to confront the reality I had been avoiding. Sitting across from my partner, I searched for the right words. "I've been feeling invisible," I said quietly, my voice shaking slightly. "I feel like I'm not seen, not really, and I can't keep pretending I am okay." He looked surprised, then defensive. But I didn't falter. I spoke about the emptiness, the silence, the neglect that had made me vulnerable. I didn't mention the men from the party, they were symbols in my heart, not the story I needed to tell. I spoke about feelings, the ones I had buried for far too long. For the first time, I wasn't hiding behind smiles or excuses. I was telling the truth, raw and unfiltered. It didn't go smoothly. It never does when people wake up to truths that have been ignored. There were arguments, tears, moments when it felt impossible to breathe under the tension. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when my own voice carried weight I hadn't realized I possessed. And through it all, I understood that this confrontation wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about awakening. It was about finally standing in the light of my own worth. Days passed, and I began to make choices I hadn't dared to consider before. I reached out to friends I had neglected. I pursued small joys that I had convinced myself didn't matter. I started setting boundaries in my relationships, demanding to be heard and valued. And though I sometimes thought of the 3 men from the party, I didn't feel shame. I felt gratitude, for reminding me that life could be felt fully, for giving me the courage to confront my own heart. Eventually, the past became a quiet echo rather than a roaring presence. I wasn't defined by the choices I had made in a single night, I was defined by what I did afterward, how I used that moment of awakening to reclaim pieces of myself. And in that reclamation, I discovered a freedom I hadn't thought possible. Sometimes, I remember that night not with guilt or regret but with a gentle smile. It wasn't about betrayal or wrongness, it was about seeing, truly seeing, and being seen. The 3 of them had been strangers, yes, but they had been catalysts for something far deeper, the courage to live authentically, the courage to demand my own worth, and the courage to step out of a life that no longer served me. And as I move forward, I carry that night quietly in my heart. Not as a scandal, not as shame, but as the first spark of a life I refused to keep dimmed. I had learned something essential, that sometimes, the most profound love is not just the love we give to others, but the love we finally allow ourselves to feel, and the truth we finally have the courage to speak.